We'll get started with the dirty tap water in 3, 2, 1.
And we're live.
Here we are at the Dirty Tap Water, our first episode in person. I'm super stoked to be here.
We're in the North 4th Street skyscraper. Courtesy of the Wellness Studio?
Wellspring Counseling and Coaching.
Wellspring.
But we could call it the Wellness Studio.
That was your internship site, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The Wellness Center.
So we're here. We just did a little making of the set. We're in your office right now.
Yeah.
And we had like a backdrop all set up and ended up going with like the simplest option possible.
Yeah. Which is actually what you suggested at the beginning. But yeah, man.
And you've been working here for how long now?
I've been here for like a year and a half. So this is my psychotherapy practice that I work at with Dr. Bruning.
It's an amazing office space.
Yeah.
There's two, you can't see it, it's on our faces, but there's two massive windows here and two massive windows over here overlooking the city of Steubenville.
You got the Ohio River, beautiful Ohio River, and the Fallensby Mill down in the corner, blowing smog up in some old steel.
Growing up, I used to look out my bedroom window, and there's like a flame.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still there, but there was a flame at least, like from the bedroom window that I grew up on, LaBelle, which is one of the older neighborhoods in Steubenville. And as a little kid, I would always imagine that I was looking out against Mordor.
Yeah.
And then we just have like a lot of trains that run through the Ohio Valley, right next to the Ohio River. And so when the trains were going and the flame,
Felt
just
like
the Lord of the Rings themes
dude.
as a little kid.
Yeah.
We're alive.
Yeah.
So it's Easter.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like different holidays bring up different things, but for me at least, I've just been so locked into family that I haven't been thinking about a whole lot of dirty tap water.
Yeah.
There's usually something always stirring in the background.
Yeah.
Do you have any trails or any trailheads as they use in the IFS community?
Well, I guess as soon as we started recording, I started feeling kind of anxious. So like right now I'm like, okay, like we're here, we gotta like talk right. Like I think for me, I love our conversation so much, and that's why we got started. I remember probably a year ago, I don't know, we were talking on the phone. It was one of the first times that we connected for a while since you were in Baton Rouge. And we just talked for like 2 or 3 hours. And I don't know if it was the time that we were talking about the dreams that you were having, or how you and John were thinking about doing an album that was like pure dreams, or we were talking, Taylor Swift's new album had just come out, so we were talking about some of the like psychodynamic content of her songs. And that was like one of the first times that I was like, dude, we should do this as like a podcast. Mm-hmm. Like we should just like, when we're having conversation, we should just like hit record. And then we kind of flirted around, like we talked about it. So I guess even just as I'm saying that, I'm starting to feel like more calm, but there's this like part of me that's like, okay, like show up and perform, like say something interesting, talk about something that's cool. Like we've talked about too, the difference between like how personal is it fair or appropriate to be. Like we're really trying to flirt with like vulnerability. And we were in a work meeting the other day, and Dr. Bruning was like, the goal of our practice here at Wellspring is to be like the pinnacle of professional vulnerability, or no, the pinnacle of like professional intimacy. And those are like two words that just like feel like oil and water to me. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's similar vibes to what we're trying to do here. Is like there's no need to put our dirty laundry out, but at the same time being like open and honest. And so I think, for me, even getting started, before kind of going into like what's been on my mind, I feel like it's so important to just check in with where I'm at right now. And I was feeling just like, make it a good one. Like we're finally here, like make it like an interesting conversation. Yeah. But I also like feel like that's like a surefire way for me to put my foot in my mouth and say a lot of stupid things in a performative way of like trying to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's great to own that. I always think it's such an interesting like shift of energy state what we were doing before now was problem solving and like efficiency and get it done, and to kind of switch into more of like a settled back, kind of whatever happens is such a, I think that takes practice. I definitely feel that like jarring thing. We both wanted to have time to talk on the podcast, and there's the tension of like, we want the production and the sound and the lights to all look good, but every bit of time we extend with that eats up the limited time we have, just because I'm in Steubenville. I fly back to Baton Rouge tomorrow or tonight. I think about that a lot with playing live music too. It's sort of a weird shift, because the whole time you're setting up, there's sort of like you're plugging in cables, you're turning knobs, you're in super technical mode. And then there's a part of you that's in super personable mode, which is like trying to meet people that have come kindly enough to your show, and they're just your friends and family. And then there's sort of like a professional side that you're dealing with, which is like paying the venue, if it's a pay to play kind of place, or just getting paid, or the every venue is just kind of a weird situation. And then there's the performance side of it, which is just 4 totally different energy states. And I think when we have a lot of problems with sound, it can make it really hard to just jump into a performance, because it's just such a different headspace. But yeah, I feel good. I think one thing I'm noticing is that because this is podcast number 5 or 6, we put out episode 5, but we've done other ones that have had technical difficulties. Yeah. That's the other thing.
Oh my gosh, dude.
The last time we recorded a podcast, it's not going to go out just because the Wi-Fi was cutting out.
Dude, we literally have 8 like different chunks of like us getting started, and then the like Wi-Fi cutting out, and it was dude, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Well, it's tough because then we recorded most of the podcast and we couldn't see each other.
So
it was sort of like a speaker phone call, but we had put all this time into making our video look good, and ended up recording the video, but we just couldn't see it live.
I forgot my mic.
But this is a different feel doing it live. I think at the end of the day, though, it's sort of like the more you do something repetitively, the less pressure you put on yourself to do it well. That I don't know if you've had that experience as a therapist, but your first couple sessions, it just feels like there's so much pressure. Or when I first moved to Baton Rouge, even though I had been doing therapy for the last couple of years, those first few sessions, there's just so much pressure and performance, and as you settle in, because there's a rhythm, you don't get as sort of anxious about it. And for me, the more we do the podcast, the less I feel a need to perform. Because it feels like it's just gonna go where it's gonna go. So, I think I'm curious, because we've had a few clunkier episodes, but it was all due to technical difficulties. And also, I've just been so much in family mode, which has been so nice. But often the stuff we talk about is the stuff that I've been reading about.
Well, I definitely think, I don't know, I think it'll come out more in time too, but I think the value of these conversations is also just to be like you and I, just like all over the place, and talking about a lot of different things. And as you're saying, though, I think what's striking me is just the importance of like being able to settle in, and like the importance of naming it when we're not settled in. Like, because this is the importance of process. Like, I pretty much start every single one of my therapy sessions out with like, where should we begin today? And like beginning at like that point, because so many times I guess like if we started and we just started like rolling, and I had this like anxiety, like whatever way I would like relate to you or relate to being here or relate to recording, it would have been like funneled through this like anxiousness. And I think that's the thing that like you're kind of talking about. You said the first couple sessions, I was like, dude, first couple sessions good for you. For me, it's been like the first year and a half. First 2 years of being a therapist, I feel like I'm finally like starting to feel comfortable in that place of like, that the confidence of like, I have a pretty good feel for what I'm doing. But I do think a lot of it is just time. It's just reps, just settling in.
Do you feel that as a teacher? Because I know this is your first semester or second semester?
No, it's my third.
It's your third semester?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and especially with like, there's one side of it which is just like teaching a class in general, and the other side of it is like teaching material. So it's my third semester that I've taught, but each semester I've taught a different course. And so this semester so it's like I've had to like learn information for this first time each time, and that's been like a grind of like reading a lot. And it's like, I've had the thought of like, dude, they should just make all the students teach the courses, because that's how you learn, like I learned so much by teaching, and I think that's a pretty good general rule of thumb as well. But yeah, dude, at the beginning of every semester, it's like at the first class, I like feel my heart like beating out of my chest, and I can like, if I put my hands up, I can see my hands are quivering, and I can feel that anxiousness show up. And for me, at the beginning, I actually had a point a couple of classes in where I was like, hey, like, I kind of want to practice what I'm preaching about, like being transparent as a therapist, being honest. And I pretty much just said, like, I realize that I'm putting pressure on myself to teach you guys like everything, because there's like so much I want to share with you. I'm so excited about this content. It's Introduction to Counseling, which is like my bread and butter. Like I love it. That I was like trying to get to everything, and so each class was like pushing on and on and on and on, and then we weren't like making it through the chapters, and I was like, I'm gonna like try to practice what I preach, and realize that like putting unrealistic expectations on myself, because that's one of the things that I've read about. One of the suggestions to therapists is consider whether your performance anxieties are based on unrealistic expectations. And I realized my performance anxieties in the class that I'm teaching on counseling, trying to teach people not to have excessive expectations, had excessive expectations for myself of wanting to teach them everything. And once I took that pressure off, that next class, it felt like a super easy pace, and I just, from start to finish, went through the whole chapter notes, which I hadn't done like yet in the semester, and I left like feeling great. I was like, wow, like when I was able to just be with whatever it was that I was being with in that moment.
The interpersonal stuff being the Tiber.
Yeah.
Did you do straight from the Tiber book? John Paul got me the Tiber Interpersonal Process in Therapy book for my birthday, and I actually left it here.
Oh yeah.
Well, so I was flying to Niagara Falls to do a half marathon with James Downs and Evan Nohara and Bridget Nohara, and my bag on. Shout out to Breeze Airlines for losing my bag.
I've never even heard of Breeze Airlines.
They're a vacation airline, but they're extremely affordable, and my bag ended up in some foreign country, but it got sent to James Downs' house in Columbus, who dropped it off at my parents' house. So I finally am reunited with the Tiber book.
Good.
Would you consider that your holy grail as a therapist, or is there something else that speaks to you?
No, for sure. Yeah, it's just the basic idea is like we're relational people, and we're created in relationships, we're hurt in relationships, and we're also healed in relationships. And it's definitely the clinical foundation. And I think, I don't know, it was interesting in grad school, because I got to grad school and I was like studying counseling. We were studying together, and I was like, this is not what I thought counseling was, right? I was teaching people to essentially, or learning about like CBT, which says like reframe your thoughts, like analyze your thoughts and realize like that's a stupid thought, don't believe it anymore, which can be really, really helpful for a lot of people. And it was certainly helpful for me. Like I realized a lot of things that I believed and learned to like reframe them. But I was just shocked because it wasn't at all what I thought therapy would be like. And I think interpersonal psychotherapy is like prototypically, like it's the like prototypical therapy. It's like what you think therapists do when you think of therapists. It's like
Good Will Hunting.
Good, exactly. I was just gonna say it's Good Will Hunting. Yeah.
That book has sort of changed my therapeutic approach, just partially because those vignettes. So there's just all kinds of examples where this therapist, Edward Tiber, gives all examples of what's called an emotionally corrective experience, where the therapist sort of it's really simple in its execution, but it's really nuanced in the model, it seems like, because it takes in, like, the therapist is, at their best, is able to conceptualize what the client's sort of core negative emotional experience is by what plays out with the therapist. Yeah. So that's what's so challenging about this work, is that it has to play out with the therapist in order for the fear, like we were talking about in the one episode that got cut, for the fear structures to get activated. Yeah. And then when the fear structures get activated, the therapist has an opportunity to respond in an alternative way that sort of grounds the client back into a sense of like, oh, maybe not everybody responds in the way that I thought they would. Yeah. It's so simple in how it feels, but it's such a nuanced understanding, because you have to have a really big grasp, I think, of the typical patterns that people fall into, or maybe the typical, I guess he would call it relational patterns. And he's really, really clear about it. He kind of breaks it down into 3, because it's sort of a book for entry-level therapists. But that has... you
want to name those 3?
Yeah. It's what? Moving away, moving towards, moving against. Mm-hmm. And moving away being sort of like an interpersonal defense of becoming invisible.
Yeah, like avoidance.
Avoidance, sort of being in the background, comfortable with being invisible. Moving against being a little bit more oppositional. Mm-hmm. And then moving toward would be more like people-pleasing. Mm-hmm. And all of those are adaptive in their own way. I guess the idea is that when they're inflexible, that the person runs into trouble because they only respond in that rigid way.
Dude, it's funny because this is literally chapter 7 is the chapter that I'm lecturing on tomorrow.
Really? And is this a good review?
Yeah, I haven't reread it yet, so I'm kind of like,
you can play the podcast for your students tomorrow.
Seriously, yeah.
But this whole idea, I think, of having sort of a working model of the person, which is something that I think I grew up. So my dad is a philosopher and sort of in the camp of philosophy of the human person. Actually, his book is on that desk right there.
Yeah.
And his whole one of the kind of personalist tenets is that you don't categorize people. Like, you kind of take people for who they are, right in front of you. He calls it like the irreducibility of the person. Yeah. So I grew up with that.
I remember I asked him one time, I was like, Dr. Crosby, like, it was actually at Jeremy's ordination, like, what is personalism? Because I like hear all about it, but I don't actually know what it is. And he's like, yes, well, personalism is asking what makes someone a who rather than a what. And I was just like, or I think it was something along those lines. I was like, this is why I have no idea what personalism is. Because I want that, like, I guess there's that part of me that's like, what's the like reducible, like what's the definition, and
I can totally relate to that. That's so funny. I think that's a personality thing of my dad, where it's so hard for him. It's hard for him to give like opinions. Yeah. Because he's such a peacemaker, which is I think one of his greatest traits. But there's such I remember growing up being like, Dad, what's your favorite color? And he'd give me like a classic philosopher's answer. I'm like, well, it depends on what you mean by color. Like, I think you like orange.
Yeah. I just want to figure out what construction paper to draw you a picture on. Like, yeah.
But the whole having a working model of where people's personalities or interpersonal traits fall into is so not just helpful. It's necessary as a therapist. Yeah. And I think if you're really skilled, you can eventually move to the place where you don't need them because you're not sort of thinking about the model. Mm-hmm. It's sort of more just like anything you learn, it becomes sort of embodied. And that's where I think it's so interesting to have lots of different working models to understand people. The danger being the opposite of like, let's just totally make this person their label.
Do you mean like theoretical models for understanding how people operate in the world?
It seems like there's like so many different kinds of personality. Like, for example, last night at dinner, my family and I were talking about my parents are into the 4 temperaments.
Yeah, right.
Sort of as like the most low resolution.
Or like Myers-Briggs. Or the Enneagram.
Well, I told them about the Enneagram last night, and it was so funny because I in my head, as I was learning about it, you just sort of diagnosed yourself and your family. And the way I was kind of conceptualizing it was like mom is a 2 and dad is a 9. And my dad was like super suspicious about it at first.
Like, that's so
reductionist.
It's so reductive. You can't put me in a number.
But they have like a part of the page on, I forget, on one of the Enneagram websites where it's like the types in relationship.
Yeah.
And I started to read out the 9 and the 2, and they were like, looking at each other like, oh my God. And there was like this, my mom's from Austria, so she's got this beautiful Austrian accent. But there was just like this, eventually my girlfriend Abigail was like, Mike, maybe you should stop reading this. Because they were just like, oh, this is so accurate.
Oh, it's scary, man.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it has to do with, I guess the Enneagram is sort of like a lower, or a higher resolution, more detailed, nuanced version of something like 4 temperaments. I mean, they're different. The temperaments are sort of connected with like bodily fluids, I think, in the ancient Greeks.
That's what they say, yeah.
It's like yellow bile and red blood. And whereas the Enneagram is more, it was actually based in spiritual direction. There was a desert father, Evagrius Ponticus, and I think he based like personality types that kind of went with the 7 deadly sins.
Oh.
And then I think there was 2 others that got added.
7 wasn't enough deadliness.
7 wasn't enough deadly sins. And also like the alternative virtues as well. So anyway, just these working models are so interesting to conceptualize people and hold them very loosely, realizing like people fall into many different categories, and they can also change over the course of their life, or parts of them maybe have a certain type. But the Tiber one is just like so clear cut.
It is, and it is. Well, it's clear in the sense that it's pretty broad. And so the belief is that relational patterns are consistent across time and context. And so it feels, I guess it's like pretty broad in that like it's pretty easy to see from like a 30,000 foot view like where the cities are, and like it's pretty easy to make distinctions in terms of clumpings of behavior and like the reason underlying that. But it's not quite this thing that like puts people in the box, and that's one of the reasons that I really like it, is that it's a really helpful way to it's both helpful and non-reductionistic, I find. Mm-hmm. But what you're talking about is just like personality, and so I think it is fair to say that like Myers-Briggs, 4 temperaments, attachment style, the DSM, the Enneagram, all these things are talking about like what is the person. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily what is the person, but what is personality. And so one of my favorite, I love this topic because I love personality.
You gave me a book our first semester in counseling, because you had been a psychology major. I was a philosophy major. You gave me a book that was just theory of personality. You said, I think you'll like this.
Yeah, man.
I think I still have. Do you still have that, by the way?
I might.
Okay.
I don't know.
We'll talk about it.
Dude, what I love about it, it's fucking terrifying. When you're like, I'm my own person, and then you read this description, you're like, holy shit. This person believes that they're their own person. They're compulsively independent. When they feel insecure, they lean on their own strengths. And you're like, I'm smarter than this book. And you literally do the exact thing that the book's describing your personality to have. And so one of my favorite definitions, actually Harry Stack Sullivan, the book that we were looking at in Matt's office, Harry Stack Sullivan is the grandfather of interpersonal psychotherapy. And he described personality as the collection of interpersonal behaviors that a child develops in order to decrease anxiety with their caregivers. And that's a pretty reductive perspective of personality. He's saying like what personality is all the things that you learn to do to experience less anxiety with your mom and dad, with my mom and dad.
This is very attachment focused.
Yeah,
model.
Yeah. But he prefigured attachment theory.
Oh wow.
And he and Carrie Horney is who developed the 3 different types: the moving towards, moving away, moving against. And so the basic idea here is that if when you brought up emotional problems, your parents responded like, okay, yeah, come on, like I'll respond, like I'll be available to that, you likely would develop a stance where when you are stressed emotionally, you will move towards other people, because that's adaptive. It was a helpful behavior And when you had problems, you brought your problems up, and your parents said, you don't have problems. People on the other side of the world have problems. Like, you need to toughen up, bucko, right? You would probably learn a withdrawing to move away from. When you have emotional pain, you probably learn to move away from other people because you've learned, if I have problems and I bring them to my parents, I just have more problems because they also reject me. And then if you brought up your emotional problems and your parents just like attacked you, right? One of the beliefs about the interpersonal theory is that we learn to treat ourselves the way that our parents treated us, right? So our self-concept develops based on the treatment from significant others in our lives, most frequently our parents. And then we treat others the way we've learned to treat ourselves. And this creates the congruence across time of relational patterns. And it's one of the interesting things I say to clients a lot, right? Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. But I take that not so much as a prescription, so much as a psychological law of you will love your neighbor as yourself. So it's really important that you learn to love your neighbor better because it's going to impact how you love yourself. And it's very important that you learn to love yourself better because it's going to impact how you love your neighbor. But this idea that personality is the collection of interpersonal moves that we learn to keep us more secure, safe with our parents, it feels dehumanizing. It feels like we're just kind of like dumbed down like to a certain sense of a code. And so I've also heard it said that John Paul II has said, although this is like, I really need to fact check this because the amount of times that I've said, JP said
that's the problem with being a cradle Catholic in Steubenville is that you end up picking up so many one-liners outside of noon mass.
I have no idea.
You have no idea if they're true.
But I heard that John Paul II, my namesake, described personality as the spontaneous expression of love. And so I think here you have these like two like kind of more humanistic side of humanity, which is like humans are free and you can be your own person, right? And there's really something irreducible. There's a word that your dad uses in his book for like the deeper down you get in the person, the less you can describe it. I forget what the word is, but and so there's this side, this like humanistic, beautiful, empowering freedom side, the kind of Viktor Frankl, and then there's this very kind of deterministic side of like, well, your personality is really just what you learn to keep yourself safe. But I think that one of those alone is actually insufficient. I think they need to come together. So I like combining those definitions, that personality is the collection of interpersonal behaviors that you learn to keep yourself safe, and in its best sense, it's the spontaneous, free expression of love. And this is why one of the things I love about our profession is that it puts if we're really practicing well, it puts such a burden of weight on like us to do our own personal work. And because I have this interpersonal style, just like you're talking about, our clients have this style of like relating to other people. I have this style of relating to my clients. And when I'm operating out of that style compulsively without conscious awareness, I'm actually limiting their freedom because I'm limiting the space where they can spontaneously express themselves. And so the models are really helpful, but they're so scary when you read something like that because it's like, oh my gosh, is that all I am? And it can really make us wonder, like, what if I'm not unique? What if I'm not special? What if I am just a product of my upbringing and there's actually nothing of substance deep down in JP, but there's something in our work that actually says like, yeah, you gotta figure that shit out. Otherwise, you're not really going to be able to help people as much as you could, or you'll be able to only help one type of person that fits with your personality, but that's somewhat problematic as well.
I think that's why for me I'm always so fascinated with these personality types, particularly not really quite Myers-Briggs, but more sort of the initial Jungian psychological types. The original book is sort of like, even the Jungians are like, this is dense and hard. And also it's sort of right at the beginning of his development of it. But the reason I'm so interested in this is that you probably have this experience where a lot of your clients, you'll speak in a certain way and it'll really resonate, and you'll speak in that same way with other clients.
Oh yeah.
And they have no idea what you're talking about. And it was this sense immediately like, if I'm going to be not only a good therapist but a good communicator, I need to learn to pick up the language that my client is using, and then learn how to speak the language.
Yeah.
And it's not English.
Yeah.
It's inside of English. Inside of each language, there's a million ways to express yourself that are actually different things. This is where I think, because a lot of these personality models kind of tell you what you value. So that's sort of like Enneagram. They say like the 9 values internal peace, and the 4 values like your individual expression. And then a lot of these models like Ken Wilber has this model that is just one of the most broad, expansive models, integrating a lot of different things. But he has sort of not a model of personality, but a model of the development of a person's consciousness. And he kind of integrates it with all kinds of Eastern spirituality, Western personality models. But what I find so interesting about the Jungian stuff is that he's saying that actually there's modes of consciousness that take in information totally differently. Mm-hmm. We talked about this a little, I think, a couple of podcasts ago. But for example, someone who's primarily a sensor, they take in things through the concrete world. They're acknowledging that something is first and foremost before they're acknowledging what it is, where it's going, how do I think or how do I feel about it. And for those people, if you're speaking in a lot of abstracts, that's just not their center of gravity, right? And so for me, it's coming to realize that if I'm going to love this person, well, I have to understand that what makes that kind of person tick. And it comes to be that they tend to really thrive with routines, with rituals, with speaking in concrete facts, and they tend to benefit, I'm realizing, less from things like mindfulness because they're more mindful in general. They're just in their bodies more. Whereas someone who's either more of a thinking type or more of an intuitive type, honoring their need for abstraction, the energy that abstraction gives them, it's a different language because they're actually exploring what is this thing inside of me. That I think learning that there are these different languages has been so helpful, and especially because so Jung said that like not only did we have these cognitive functions like sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling, but they can be directed either introverted or extroverted. So introverted just meaning with an awareness of the self, and extroverted meaning in the moment of that perception you're forgetting the self. I think a great example of this is that if you're skiing and you're introverted sensing, you might be looking down at your skis and saying, last time I skied, my skis looked a little thinner. I wonder how that's going to affect. Oh, I noticed that when I ski with these thinner skis, I can feel that under my feet. Whereas extroverted sensors, they might have an experience of like they totally forget that they're having this experience in the moment. They have a feeling of like, I was one with the mountain, or I was just there. I don't have any real memory of it. Those tend to be very athletic people. So it can be introverted or extroverted, but that totally changes a person's level of awareness. So for example, I think my dad has pretty strong extroverted feeling. And so for him, he's always very in tune with like what other people are feeling around him. And so if I want to connect with him and I ask him how he feels, which is how I tend to relate to other people sort of instinctively because that's my center of gravity, he's not always going to know what I'm talking about. And so if I want to connect with him, asking about the people he cares about just totally lights him up. And then he goes inward often after that. But it's sort of, there's like these, each person has a way of being that if you put the key in there, it just unlocks more. Yeah. Because they're comfortable in that space. I think that's why these models are so helpful, is it gives you languages to speak with people.
I love that phrase, like if you can understand what someone's like key of being is, it unlocks people. And there's something so beautiful about understanding, and Tiber refers to this as client response specificity. He says that there are therapies that are directive, that say, hey, the job of the therapist is to be directive, to tell the client what they need to do differently in their life so they can do it and be better. There's a lot of styles of therapy that are non-directive, that say, actually, it's not the therapist's responsibility. This is like Rogerian therapy. It's not the therapist's responsibility to tell the client what to do. The therapist just needs to create a nice empathic space, and the client if they create those settings, the client will find it all on their own. And Tiber says, well, we're neither directive nor non-directive, we're active. And we understand that there's a client response specificity, so that some clients actually do benefit from less direction. Some clients benefit from no direction. So there's this kind of a common question of advice giving in therapy. Should therapists give advice?
Sometimes. And
that's the answer. The answer is it depends. I mean, I say this in my class all the time. Someone will raise their hand and ask a question. I'll usually go, and I'll try to be like, what's a really smart thing to say here? Don't come up with anything. And then I usually say, well, it depends, it depends, it depends, it depends, it depends, it depends, it depends.
Yeah.
Because people are so, unique. But as you were talking, I was appreciating just how different you and I are, because I think one of the things I've noticed in our conversations, a lot of times when we talk about like these types, is a lot of times like you might say something like, this is how I think we're different. It's like funny to me because it's like, oh, maybe I just don't even like the way that you categorize, especially like in the Jungian stuff. It's like, wow, maybe I don't even know. That doesn't even like it doesn't cross my mind like to categorize myself in that way. And then I was thinking about, we're talking about how like these types of personality can be really helpful for like the helping profession. I love that phrase, like the key of being. If you can figure out what someone's key of being is, you can unlock them to like the beauty of themselves, really. But then I was wondering, like, what got you into therapy? Like, I know you so well, and I'm thinking of like just calling you up and when I was in my aimless wasteland doing something that I hated, be like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go back to grad school for counseling because it seems like a better option than what I'm doing. And you had the same sentiment, but yeah, I don't think we've actually really we've talked very often about like what brought you into therapy, like why you're a therapist, like what is keeping you in the field, what you enjoy about it, like what brought you to therapy, and how'd you become a therapist?
Well, I think in the moment it was very haphazard. In the moment, you and I had both planned to apply to the University of Dallas at the end of school. I mean, what was the name of the wilderness therapy?
Oh yeah,
job?
Ascent Wilderness Therapy.
We were both going to work. What was it?
In Utah, Ascent. I think Ascent Wilderness Therapy in Utah.
And I think we were both really influenced by Matt Berninger, who runs the practice here. We both took Theology of Healing our senior spring. I was a philosophy major, so I could give you a long-winded version or a short-winded version. So just help me stay in my bumper lanes here. Yeah. But yeah, I was a bio major. I think growing up, I was always a just very active kid. Yeah. Like my first impulse in everything in general has always been to just do something. I played a lot of sports growing up. I kind of switched a lot of sports. Kind of was.
You're a real athlete too.
I loved it. And also went to summer camp and was into the outdoors, whitewater kayaking, rock climbing. And there was a number of events, really like, I could point to two things that sort of slowed me down and then showed me different parts of myself. So first of all, I was a bio major. I didn't want to go to medical school. Yeah. But I was thinking about PT school just because it's so tactile.
Is that why you got into bio?
Yeah, I think, part of it was that I just didn't know. I mean, part of my story, at least, is having a free education a mile away from school. Yeah. Not needing to be super bought in, really. I mean, like, the transition from high school to college was super, I want to say seamless. Maybe that's not the right word.
No pressure.
Well, there was no effort.
Yeah.
I didn't really even have to, all I had to do was apply. Yeah. I got in. I applied to a few other schools, Belmont Abbey College.
I remember because you were thinking about going in wrestling there.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about doing wrestling. They had a tuition exchange program. All the Catholic universities in the country have some form of tuition exchange. Yeah. I think I applied to University of Dallas.
Into context, too, the free education comes because both of our dads are professors. For those who
some call
don't
us
know,
the faculty brats.
Yeah, some would say that. It's not because of it's certainly not because of my intellect that I'm getting full rides, but just both our dads, and that's how we grew up knowing each other. Is both our dads were professors, but
it was it had in retrospect, it had a huge influence on me that I didn't have a big buy-in. I mean, I'm learning now as I'm walking with seniors in high school who are my clients just how grueling the college application process is.
Yeah.
Just first of all, the applications themselves can be costly, and you have to know what you're doing, and then all the different visits. I really visited a few schools, and then I decided to come to Franciscan. And how many kids from our graduating class of Catholic Central went to school at Franciscan?
Our graduating class was what, like 120?
It was a little less than that.
90?
It was just below 100.
And at least, I want to say like 30 to 60.
I went for a run with James Sarlo the other day, and he threw out the number 40.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And he went to Franciscan, went to Catholic
30
Central.
and 60, yeah.
So,
somewhere there, yeah.
So it was, it's a very unique school, but for you and I, at least for me, I'll speak for me, that was going with the flow.
Yeah.
I was going to the Catholic
100%,
University,
dude.
getting the liberal arts degree.
I didn't have my shit together enough to go against the flow.
Same. And I think part of that has been a real gift.
Yeah.
Because there's been, I think about how this small town, coming in from Baton Rouge, it's just there's a stillness here. Like people aren't really coming, people aren't really going. I mean, people will visit Franciscan, but I feel like I can come see you and we just pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
The big change is that everybody has one more kid.
Yeah.
One more child is in the universe. But so I started as bio. That kind of fit with my very active personality, my tendency to kind of just throw myself into the fire.
And it makes a lot of sense as you're saying, like seeing things out there, like seeing things like in the world, like
I mean, you remember I had a big skateboarding phase.
Yeah.
If you want to see, Pancake Productions 3 was our old YouTube channel. I think there's a lot of videos on there.
Yeah.
But my instinct as a kid was just always to like put my shoes on and just get going.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of doing physical therapy kind of fit in with that pretty well.
Yeah. And like the love of athletics, like the love of like, we both experienced we love training. We both experienced different like injuries in high school, like twisted ankles, stuff like that, you know? So it's like, it makes sense for someone who loves athletics of like, well, I'm not going to be an athlete professionally.
Yeah.
So I might as well help athletes professionally, you know? Definitely.
So there's the love of all of the, really, I think you said that best, the training is kind of where I wasn't an exceptional athlete. You were a really great basketball player in college.
I'd say you were an exceptional. I would consider you.
I was decent. You
just didn't start very early.
Yeah, I started sophomore year. I think a lot of my natural gifts were in track, but I only ran senior year. Yeah. But we ran the 4x8 with a lot of our childhood friends.
Yeah. I think also a lot of your athletic skill a lot of it was like formed at camp in like paddling and climbing. It was very like you and your body rather than necessarily, like it doesn't sound like you guys played a lot of ball sports understandably at camp. So it's there's a different like, and in a small old steel town, there's not a lot of like sports that are broader than the like football and basketball and like, you know. But I think
you were more in traditional team sports than I was.
Yeah.
I played soccer for a couple years, and we just had also great soccer players in our generation.
Yeah. But the fact that you can go down a Class 5 rapid.
Yeah, I think there's something.
Your boat can flip over as you're getting like chomped, and you can roll.
Chomped.
What's the biggest waterfall you've paddled?
There's a waterfall in Mexico called Silencio.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
That was the peak of. It's so funny because Abigail, my girlfriend, I would consider her like the more daring, risk-taking person now. Like she went skydiving, and the other day we were at a New Year's party, and there was four-wheelers there, and she was like, "Let's go," and I was super hesitant.
Dude, you remember in Kathmandu?
Oh, what the scooters?
On the mopeds? Yeah. This is a great story, man.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, that was already where it was coming out. I mean, that was the first time where I was sort of like,
dude,
a little nervous about how willing you were to take risks.
Dude, for a long time, I saw it as like you were the adventurer, and I just kind of like tacked along. And people were like, "John Paul, you're so adventurous," and I was like, "I'm kind of just Mike's friend," and he's like really like because you would always like lead the charge, doing crazy shit. I mean, like paddling in Mexico down rapids, and
But the rope swing.
We got, the rope swing, dude. Oh my gosh, this 100-foot rope swing underneath the Steubenville Veterans Memorial Bridge.
That was when your mom, Miss Jenna, called my mom.
It was after Nepal.
Pia, I think we need to have an intervention for our children, because one of us posted it on Facebook, and I think they both kind of freaked out.
Yeah. But, because you made this, for context, you made this swing, climber, strapped in, crawled out probably 50 feet on like the underneath like the steel beam of the bridge, strapped in, put a rope in, and then we literally strapped in and then just like jumped off the bridge. But it was crazy. It's very dangerous. I mean, I know you know what you're doing, but the bridge I doubt does. Like that, yeah.
No matter if somebody knows what they're doing, it's just something I wouldn't do anymore.
Right, something could go wrong.
Yeah.
Like I understand my parents' utter fear, but we were in. It was after we went and served with Miscellaneous, a charity in Kolkata, for a couple weeks, and then we were in Kathmandu and we rented mopeds, and so you were like, and you're the one who brought me on that trip. You're like, JP, I want to go to check up to Everest Base Camp, and I was like, really? Can we do that? You're like, yeah, we figured it out. But then it was crazy because then like we got on the mopeds and it's like in Kathmandu, it's just, there's no lanes. Like there's these trucks and mopeds and it's crazy. Monkeys, sand. And I remember like I got onto the moped and I was just like
I was terrified.
I was like, dude, this is like Super Mario Brothers for real. Like I was just like I was like weaving in and out of traffic. And then I looked back and I'm like, where's Mike? And I pulled over.
Going slow.
And you were like going slow. Like I was like, it was so weird that it was. I mean, I think it's similar to what you talk about like now with Abigail of like, she's and you're like, it's like, wait, Mike, you're the like adventure crazy one, but
yeah.
But that was, and then dude, you I remember you came down we went to the monkey temple in Kathmandu, which was crazy because there's like hundreds of monkeys everywhere.
We got to share the clip if we can find it.
Yeah.
Of us getting close to that fanged monkey.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You have it on your GoPro. And
yeah.
And it started to kind of like juke us out, and then
we were totally taunting it.
It showed its fangs, and then there's just a clip of you and I just bolting down the stairs. There's this monkey running.
Yeah, we were like, and then there's like, we're like, ah! Split the other direction. But and then we were coming down this road, and you hit a patch of sand. And like slid out, and it wasn't bad because you weren't going fast, and hit the Buddhist monk. And he was like,
just using that Eastern term, I'm probably still paying off all that karma.
Yeah, dude, you're like, and he was like,
he was pretty calm given the situation.
And
but
I
like
couldn't tell. Yeah.
I basically hit the sand, and I had hydroplaned, and I basically like swept this dude.
Yeah, like classic, like dude standing here.
Full
like,
Buddhist monk, full garb, like kind of sitting on the street corner, coming out of some kind of shop of some sort. And I just felt so.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then
But we all had crashes. I mean, maybe you didn't, but I remember Justin ran into like a temple, and
did he?
Martin got pulled over
and
taken by the police. That's a whole late night story, but
anyway, it was crazy because I'm just laughing because it's like you've always been there. That was a time when like, for whatever reason, like the roles just switched, and I like was not afraid of some obviously terrible things like this, being in this foreign country with traffic that doesn't seem to follow any rules, and I'm just like, you know, and yeah. But anyway, we were talking about sports, and so you're an athlete. You do a lot of whitewater. You did a lot of whitewater paddling.
And I think that's just why biology sort of attracted me. I mean, I took an exercise physiology course with Keebler, and then there was some sort of like semester where I thought maybe what I would do is kind of pursue opening my own gym, maybe have it be sort of like a gym physical therapy kind of space, because I was working out a lot. And I did some weight training program that just totally overdid it. And
squat every day?
It was some Russian squat program. And
yeah,
I had knee problems from wrestling, but yeah, basically I like could not do the weight training anymore in the same capacity. And I heard somewhere as a physical trainer, your fitness is your business card. And something of that stuck to me where I thought, I don't know if this is going to be a semi-permanent injury. It was bad.
Yeah.
So, and that was, there's so many details of the story, but I ended up taking time off of school and lived in Madrid for a while, teaching English. And
after you went and worked for the roofing
again,
company.
this could be as long or as short as we want it to be. Yeah. But yeah, so I was living in Spain, and at that time I was unsure of what I wanted to study. We had taken HCC 201, or no, we were about to take it junior spring.
Because we went to Montserrat.
But I had known people who had given me this book that sort of like, so there's a professor at Franciscan, Professor Gaston, sort of has like an ethos around him where people will just kind of speak about him as a legend. And there's one class that people will take, Humanities and Catholic Culture 201, which is sort of like the introduction to the major that he founded at the university, Humanities and Catholic Culture. And you and I were planning on taking it. But the reason I was planning on taking it is Scott Johnson in Austria was my RD my sophomore fall, and he had mentioned this book, like The Intellectual Life. Like, so the seed was planted. And then Tim McNamara had taken the class, and Tim was also, he's just a guy who is very, very passionate about it. And so he just was just talking to me in such a way that just kind of grabbed my imagination.
And this is just like humanities broadly, so like philosophy and ethics and the kind of tradition of the Western thought of Aristotle and all the other people who are important as well, but just like a lot of people around you who are really interested in Western thought and philosophy, like sounds like kind of billowing and you should read this.
Yeah, and so I was a philosophy major. The difference in that being that the philosophy major is more like we're going to give you a sort of survey of the history of philosophy, and we're going to spatter in the Catholic intellectual tradition, whereas Gaston's degree had it had several defining like key flag plants in it. One being that you can't understand the history of Western culture without understanding the history of Catholic culture. They're just intimately intertwined. So anyway, sort of a program that very unique program. A lot of universities have philosophy programs, but I don't think anybody else has a humanities program quite like this, and it's founded off of a thinker named Christopher Dawson. But I read this book, Agi Certi Longe, in Spain, and it did something to my brain. You and I can kind of jokingly quote it all the time, but I just fell in love with, I don't even know. I really don't even know to this day. It was my first encounter with humanities, because my dad being a philosophy professor growing up, I rejected it. I just thought it was, I would go into his study growing up and I would pull off like the dustiest philosophy book on the shelf and read out. There's a book, Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel, and it's just a dense text. And I would just go into his office and I would read it as a little kid and be like, what's this mean? You don't know what this means. And he would laugh too. He would think it's so funny. But I was having this moment where I was like,
nobody knows what it means, but it's provocative.
So, and then when I was over there, I picked up C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain. I picked up Abolition of Man, and a few other books. I read my first book by Nietzsche. I read Why I Am So Wise, and then I read Orthodoxy by Chesterton. And so,
all while you're in Spain.
While I'm in Spain, and so I decided I'm going to switch my major
after a semester in Austria.
The year after.
Good time, but like still like, yeah.
So anyway, we came back to school. I decided to switch my major to philosophy, and that semester was the semester I broke my leg. So I fell off a longboard, your longboard, and my bone.
R.I.P. to the longboard. I haven't seen it since.
R.I.P. to the longboard. R.I.P. to my leg, and R.I.P. to my personal training career.
And hello to Mr. Metal Plate,
which is still there. And so I was bedridden in my family's living room for 3 months.
Yeah, and it was a bad break, like bone out your leg.
It was bad. It was about as bad as you can get.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing that we were talking about this the other night, it's amazing that you ran a marathon.
Hashtag shout out to Dr. Peter Siska, was the surgeon at the Pittsburgh Hospital at UPMC.
Dude, could you imagine if we were back in the Middle Ages and you would just be like...
I would be like that dude that hobbles.
Yeah, like you would be the guy that's like, I can't go to war now because I broke my leg skateboarding.
Yeah, I would be like living in eternal shame of some sort.
Yeah, man.
But okay, so that time period, I was living in my parents' room, was really forced to slow down. I mean, totally.
And like your parents' living room, like essentially,
it was
right?
hard.
Your
it was
bed
really hard.
Like, yeah.
And so 2 things happened. One, I learned how to play guitar.
Yeah.
Which I don't think would have really happened if I
Wow.
didn't break my leg.
I didn't put those two together.
I'd played before, but I really had the time to get into it.
And that since has probably been one of the most significant influences, one of them, one of the most significant influences in your life.
Totally.
Would you say?
Yeah, totally. But there was a moment. My dad, I was just like itching for things to do. I'm also a little bit high on pain meds and so kind of loopy. But I remember one time he gave me a book by Pascal, I forget how you say it, the Pensée or Pensées, his thoughts. And he had a line in there which is the totality of man's problems has to do with his inability to sit alone in his own room with his own thoughts. To that effect.
Dude, I love that quote. I didn't know it was him.
Changed. Yeah. I mean, that made me realize like that is me.
Yeah.
And it turned something on in my brain that said there's something here. Like I need to explore what's going on inside. And that's when my journals just totally shifted. Like it went from, it's actually really fascinating to look at, but my journals went from kind of documenting all of the things that were happening in my life, the externals.
Like a diary.
To the expression of an internal world. And that was the beginning of philosophy. So this is all winding up for why I'm a therapist. If you want to intervene here, you can.
No, I don't.
But the short lob is that at the end of my philosophy program, I was super tired of. I both knew I had a sort of talent for thinking.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap up why I became a therapist. I knew I had a gift for thinking, and I was really thinking about. This is crazy to think about. I haven't thought about this in a long time. I was thinking about going into academia as a philosopher, a philosophy professor. But it just did not sit right. There's something about it that just didn't sit with that gut of like that old self or that other real part of me, the doer, the sort of
hero,
pragmatist, wanting things to have a purpose. I didn't just want to think about things. I wanted things to have a real tangible effect in the outer world. Went and did some worked on a vineyard, so worked with my hands, very tangible. And the way I describe it, another like one-liner in my life was, I remember kind of telling my dad, I was studying for the GRE for grad school, thinking about going to grad school for philosophy, and he said, Mike, I know you have a real gift and interest for philosophy, but you are someone who wants to bring philosophy into the trenches. And he didn't know that was, for me, that meant being a therapist or like how do ideas affect people.
Oh, I remember you telling me about this. Yeah.
But those 2 moments, like the Pascal moment and him saying, I see you being a philosopher of the trenches, were 2 defining moments sort of away from this just like hyperactive young athletic kid, really. I think that was a big shift to I do want to use my mind. I do want to have an intellectual career of some sort, but I don't want it to just be dialogues with other people. That was the big thing too. I felt like philosophy was sort of a secret language, whereas psychology, that's what we're talking about at the beginning of the podcast here, learning the language of people. For me, it was now can I bring all these ideas and now communicate it to anybody? That's always been sort of an underlying motivation behind all the thinking or intellectual pursuits that I've kind of engaged in. So that's a long-winded way of saying it. I'm sure if you asked me that story a year from now, it would look a little different. But a lot of it also had to do with the fact that you looked at me and you said, Mike, let's do the counseling program.
Yeah.
And I said no. And then a week later I said yes.
Yeah.
And we did it together.
We did.
Spring of 2019, we entered the counseling program.
Dude, I love this. I love hearing about it. I think it's intensely fascinating and really valuable. I'm really interested in that moment of reading Pascal and like that line I think the way I've heard it said is, all of man's problems come down to his inability to sit in a room by himself for 30 minutes. And maybe that's a doctored up version of the original quote. I didn't know it was Pascal, but I've been struck by that line as well. And like, dude, there you are, laying in your parents' living room, essentially kind of like no privacy because it's your parents' living room, but also like really hugely dependent, vulnerable, needy, yep. Dependent on your parents, which you before then like very, very independent, very, very independent. Dude, you're reading this book alone with pain, like of a terribly broken leg, of like you said last, I think when we were talking about it before, this kind of like embarrassment of like, I'm the outdoor guy and like I'm like this adventurous person and now I'm like bedbound and like, you know, I just remember like people coming and going and like coming to see Mike, and I think everybody loved it, but I also remember this sense of like an enjoyment of people's care, but also just like a sense of like almost a sense of disgust, like at the circumstances, or at least that's kind of how it felt as I remember it at times, like when kind of everybody was out of the room and we were just talking about like, dude, how are you doing?
Well, there's a great way to capture this with a story. My 21st birthday was that spring, a couple months after. I mean, I was bedridden for about 3 months. So my birthday is February 8th, so it was right at the beginning of the semester. So I was still living at my parents', but you had invited me, like you basically threw a 21st birthday party for me.
Because it was your home, but you had moved in with your parents because of your leg.
Yeah. And we lived together off campus 2 blocks away.
Yeah,
from both
one
of our
block
parents.
From my parents, 2 blocks from your parents.
And
when we threw parties, our parents could hear it.
John Paul, keep it down.
Yeah.
And you threw a party for me, and you told everybody to dress up
I think it was
like
Jeremy.
me.
Well, I was throwing the party, and Jeremy was like, "Let's do them." Maybe not. Maybe it was. Yeah, I actually don't.
You were definitely the guy who threw the parties, but Jeremy had his.
Yeah.
He had the same energy.
Yeah.
But you told everyone to dress up like me, and everybody came dressed up with headlamps and backpacks and rock climbing harnesses.
Yeah.
And that was accurate. I mean, that was super accurate. But I think
it was also at a time when you couldn't. That being that guy was undeniably taken away from you. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, dude.
And so for me, that was the beginning of feeling like I think there's a huge like curse to that moment, but also a huge blessing in the fact that I suddenly was known by everybody to be this sort of outdoorsy person. It felt like, I don't know, that felt like what the perception was.
Caricature of you.
But I was having this internal experience of, hey, I can't do that. But now that I can't do that, there is a lot of noise inside this inner world. And now I'm trying to get in touch with it. But somebody who maybe is in touch with that from a young age, maybe they grow up being a very artistic kid, and then their identity in university is, I'm an artistic kid, I'm an artistic person, I'm a creative person. And so their inner world is congruent with what people know about them. But I had this experience that people know me as sort of the daredevil. My brother Joey has always laughed. He's like, Mike, you've got thrill issues.
There was that bush, dude. There was a bush in front of your house that, like, right off your porch.
Yeah.
It was like, that was a thing to jump over and, like, do barrel rolls over. And, like, it was like everything was an obstacle to be climbed on or jumped over, or it wasn't worth being around.
Mm-hmm. I think that's well said. Just everything was something to, like, touch.
Yeah.
Everything was something to get involved with. And now here I am, writing poetry for the first time, actually filling up my journals. I mean, my whole life, you just gave me back a journal from 2013 and there's 3 pages written and the rest is blank. That's kind of my journaling experience as a kid, is that I would forget. I wasn't sitting still long enough to journal. So I think that was a really liberating experience, because I think the effect that had on me long term was that I was perceived in a way that I didn't experience to be true. There was an identity in the small campus world that was increasingly now not what I was experiencing, and there was something about that was really painful, I remember at the time, but it ended up being a real kind of partial liberation from needing approval.
Like an ego death.
You definitely
like
a sort of ego death.
The self-image. You couldn't live out the self-image anymore because your leg was broken. And the self-image was predicated on doing things which you no longer could do. And now everybody's saying, this is what I see Mike to do. And you're experiencing, like, there's a lot of noise. Like, but it sounds like a real, like, to read that, like, all of man's problems come down to his inability to sit in a room by himself. Like, it sounds like a real moment of awakening. And maybe not one of those, like, boom, like, awakenings, but just, like, all of a sudden it was like the gear shift. And it sounds like just like a door that you didn't know was there, like, opened up. And you're like, whoa, there's, like, another, this is what everybody, like, sees me to be. But there's, like, there are these interior rooms that I can go into, and I'm actually kind of being, like, forced by being limited, like, to go into them and explore. You are undoubtedly one of the most creative people I know, if not, like, the most creative person I know. But as I was thinking about that as you're speaking, I was also thinking, like, yeah, but I don't know that many people would necessarily, like, say that about you, because, like, I know you draw and paint on occasion, but it's not like you don't, like, you were alluding to, like, you don't fit the kind of mold of the, like,
I don't wear the mauve scarf.
Yeah. Yeah. But, like, this is one of the reasons why I love listening to your dreams. Your dreams are wild.
They're pretty loose.
And mystical. And, like, your dreams are the things of legends. Like, your dreams are the stories of worlds that might exist somewhere else in this chaotic universe. Like, there's just such a depth and a complexity and an explosion that I just have such a admiration and a just interest in.
Do you do any dream interpretation with your clients?
Not a whole lot. When they want to, but usually I stick pretty broadly, because I find the way we interpret the dreams really matters. Because if I start saying, like, oh, this is what this dream means, or this is what this dream means, it can create this, like, I'm the expert and you need to listen to me, which a lot of times people who have vivid dreams, I find well, I don't know if actually that broad categorization is true, but any dream interpretation is usually helping my clients and attempting to help my clients interpret their own dreams.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this lovely sun coming out through the dusk.
There's a nice bird that flew by right as we looked by, too.
But, yeah, man, it sounds like this period was just a real moment of, like, kind of a slow burn. But the slow burn of, like, a awakening of a new way to experience yourself. And it sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it was just frustrating. It was the experience of being slowed down.
Yeah.
Well, apparently slowed down.
Yeah.
Apparently slowed down at least in the outer world of doing. But yeah, it's that's how I became a therapist. I think for now that's what I say. I also had a stint for a while where I was discerning. This is so long ago, so it's so hard to imagine. But I was discerning becoming a priest.
Yeah.
I think part of that is every young man in the Catholic world who ever goes to a daily mass and is, seen by some lovely elderly woman in the back of the church. It's like, you look very reverent. Have you ever thought about being a priest?
Dude, Sister, what was her name in Kolkata? Not Sister Rose.
Was she the prior?
No. That
Mother
was Sister
Spirit?
Mother Mary. Or Mercy Maria.
Mercy Maria. Oh, man.
Sister Ruth.
Sister Ruth.
We walk into...
I haven't thought about Sister Ruth in so long.
We walk into Mother House in Kolkata, and the streets, chickens, cows walking through the streets, taxi, and, like, we're there, we're praying, and Sister Ruth... And, of course, this is... I don't know. For me, this was one of the times that I was, like... After Austria, I was in the depth of and what I realize it is now, it was intrusive thoughts that I should be a priest. That's what it was. It was just like, I didn't want to be. I didn't really have a desire for it. At some point in my life, I think I did. I just believed like, John Paul, you will be a priest. But I had no connection. But like, and now I realize it really was just an intrusive thought. But like, I'm fine. Like, I'm wrestling with all that all through Austria. And then we meet up in Kolkata. And Sister Ruth comes up to me and goes, yes, I know it. You will be a priest. You'll be a priest. You know, this, and she's this little, you know, Indian
you're in a foreign land.
Woman. I mean,
it fits all the archetypes.
Like literally the room next to Mother Teresa's tomb.
And we had friends whose the Truffants.
Yeah.
Mother Teresa had predicted that they were going to be married before they were engaged. I think she saw them. Was like, you two, when are you getting married? So like, there's a whole mystique around this whole mother house.
Right. You're like, maybe I'm going to mother house and this is where I'm gonna have some clarity, which is exactly what like you want in resolution to an intrusive thought. Is I just want to know, do I do it or not? And she comes up to me and she's like, and I think she said it to us both, maybe not, or maybe it was separately, but like, yes, you will be a priest. And it was funny because it was it was actually, I think, one of the things that liberated me from that intrusive thought a little bit, because it was so obviously a miss that was completely disconnected to who I was as a person or her knowledge of me. And it was so clearly like, you're just like a nice Catholic boy, and so we need priests, and so all nice, you know, it was just so off, so broadly, that I think it actually kind of, I think I was kind of like, I'm not going to be a priest just because you say I should be a priest. And then I think maybe unconsciously kind of started to have that same relationship towards this intrusive
I remember
thought.
Conversations with Adam too that seemed to be pretty like encouraging of you being a dad.
Yeah, maybe. Well, actually, you know what one of the things was, and I know I cut you off before this because you were talking about your own discernment, was all of a sudden you started discerning, like seriously, like you went on a come and see.
I went on two.
But you actually started, like it went from being this immaterial, like maybe I should become a priest, to like I'm going to visit this order.
Yeah. And I remember the one-liner I said to you that struck you. It's like, I have this ideal of being a priest in my head, but then I went to the religious orders.
Yes.
And it was like, well, obviously not here. Well, obviously not there.
Yeah.
Well, where?
Dude, no, that like...
It was like, we kind of treated it like dating for the first time.
Exactly.
I think before it had this sort of like ambiguous mystique to it.
Yes.
I'm going to be a priest.
Yeah, it was this like ideal. And it was like dating these specific women, or should I become a priest?
I think we were onto something though, because if you think about it, we're kind of confessors now.
Yeah, I think there's a call. You know,
there's a sort of depth of listening and personal relationship that a therapist has that's very congruent with a priest.
And healing through truth, healing from speaking truth about the incongruencies we have. That actually, when we acknowledge that we have an incongruence, it ceases to be an idiosyncrasy and an incongruence, but it becomes part of like the broader picture of ourselves in a more intelligible way. So I think that's true. But you saying that really changed for me, because you were like, yeah, I am looking at the priesthood in this ideal, but I think if I'm actually thinking I'm called to the priesthood, I should date a religious order. Like I should go. And I was like, I don't want to do that. But actually, point being, your own like times of discernment and the way that you actually engaged with that rather than thinking of it as an ideal, really was liberating for me, because it brought me out of this like pre-contemplation or contemplation phase into a like, are you going to take action on this or not? But I cut you off. I was just so excited.
No, I think I really resonate with that too. Yeah, there's a whole mystique about the priesthood, I think, where we come from, and we've had our zealot phases. I've had my zealot phase of spirituality, and I think anyone in the zealot phase and a Catholic mom sees a young man who's into his faith. Yeah, I think we're gonna get the message from people that the community wants us to be priests.
I don't know about you, but Miss Naptis, our high school religion teacher, would come up to me every time she'd see me. She'd be like, "I'm praying for your vocation." You know, it's funny. I saw her at Mass the other day with my son, Vincent, and she's like,
oh,
you're such a good father. Like, you know, and it's like, well, thanks for my vocation, you know, but yeah, there's a pressure, a problematic pressure, you know, something that's less than an invitation and more of an expectation.
I think too, it often speaks to a need. Like, there's such a craving for good priests, and I think also in the wake of the scandals, probably right as we're coming of age, I think that was right around the time that the scandals are coming out. And I think also my sense is that our parents and the community here relies on the spiritual fatherhood of priests far more than you and I did.
Yeah.
Although, you know, now I have Father Boniface as a spiritual director for the last 6 or 7 years, and he's really, at this point, he's my therapist. So maybe not. Maybe he is. Maybe I do have a priest that I do really look to him as I let myself take on the role of child and him being father. But really, he's the only priest where I experienced that. And definitely growing up, I think it was never quite that way with the local friars for me. Whereas for our parents, or at least for our moms, that was definitely the case.
True.
But in there's an interview with Richard Rohr and John Price from the podcast The Sacred Speaks. He's a Jungian psychotherapist who just loves Richard Rohr's work. And they were talking about the 4 worldviews, which we talked about on the first podcast. And the priestly worldview is one, I believe it's one that's sort of like maybe, I'm probably butchering this, but point is they made the comment that John Price was like, I tend to fall into this worldview. They were trying to make the pitch that essentially the incarnational worldview is the most whole worldview.
And that worldview is?
It's trying to avoid the split between matter and spirit. It's
non-dualistic.
Non-dual, but you could also think of it as incarnational worldview. Yeah. Matter is the natural hiding place for spirit. The spiritual world isn't somewhere else.
Yeah. Heaven isn't like outside of you. It's like you can be living in heaven or hell right now here, or you could be living in purgatory waiting for something to come about. You know, I think most of us, I've found that. I guess little side note, I just have realized recently that I've mostly been living my life in purgatory, like waiting for heaven to come around. And it's not till recently that I've realized, like, dude, heaven's right here for me to step into. Like, the kingdom of God is within you. Like, it's actually right here. And so I can live in a way where it's like I can be right here with everything as it is, and there's a fullness to my existence. And I still get caught up in the, like, I'll be happy when, or like a bigger house or a better car or a better income, or, you know, more kids, or a higher education or a PhD or different opportunities. And this idea of bringing together, right, that like we can live in hell right here, and many do. We can live in heaven right here, and many do. Or we can live in this like purgative state of like, it's gonna come eventually. It's a little, that's the word I'm looking for, digression.
That's what the dirty tap water is.
Yeah.
We are just digression after digression. He made the point though that he falls into the same, like Richard Rohr made a comment where he said, psychotherapist often finds themselves falling into the priestly worldview. So meaning like there's such an overlap between the psychotherapeutic role today and the priestly role today, just because the modern psyche is so split between a hyper-rationalism that's given us science and a mythic worldview that's given us the religious wisdom. And so the therapist is now kind of in that same, the therapist has one foot in the mythic and one foot in the empirical, if they're a good therapist, I think.
And that's what that's the priestly worldview. Can you?
I don't really remember what the priestly worldview was.
Sounds like bringing the incarnational worldview to everyday people. Maybe not.
I don't remember. I'm more just making the comment of like it's the priestly and the psychotherapeutic have a lot of overlap.
It's a similar role. It really is.
It's a super similar role because the goal is to. The word religion means to make whole, I believe. And think about what IFS is.
Yeah.
I think
integration.
There's a Jungian therapist, Robert Johnson, who says that all of language is healing because all of language sort of either explicitly says the word is or implicits is. Just because you have a subject and a predicate, you're basically in every sentence saying this is this. And it's to speak is to basically bind together two things that appear to be opposite.
I'm gonna need to chomp on that.
The thing I wanted to mention though is that the whole incarnational worldview, I think, is such a helpful healing place to, as opposed to kind of getting lost in like we're in this horrible the material world here is corrupt and there's some spiritual ideal that we can go be in when we die. I think it can create a sense of like maybe it can fall into the temptation of trying to abandon this world because it's just not worth making it much better. Whereas the incarnational worldview is all about not only honoring the spiritual world, but working to make here as good as we can right now, relieve as much suffering as we can now. But I often think about how good it was for me to live in this dualistic split as a kid, because it develops all the imagery, right? I think about how I want to raise my kids as firmly in a Catholic tradition that also can live in an oversimplistic worldview at times, because it allows the imagination to develop a language to familiarize itself with all the symbols of the church. And so I think the end goal, obviously, is like as a full mature adult would be maybe some more incarnational perspective. But I think it's very normal to develop a hyper spiritual perspective as a kid, or like you wouldn't tell a kid he's being too superstitious by the way he prays. You would kind of see it as really sweet and endearing and a part of his development. But maybe that doesn't apply to an adult in the same way.
And I think that's kind of part of what was happening for me in discernment was, as a young kid, I was like, I should be a priest. I wanted to be a priest, an engineer, an artist, an actor, and maybe a mechanic. Like that. Like people would ask me, like, what do you want to be? And I would like literally list those. Like
those are all things you're good at, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, things I enjoy. I was like, I want to do what I enjoy, you know. And I mean, I think that's one of the beauties. I just so appreciate my parents. In this, I give them so much flack. I'm such a prick far too often. Thinking this after a long weekend at my parents' house and, saying things that I wish I could take back. Or it's so easy for me to get caught up on the ways that I've been let down and totally miss all the gifts that I've been given. But one of the things that they did beyond right was like give me the freedom to dream. And this was, I think, in part too, like my dad working at the university and the gift of, I think one way we can talk about it is, I had like free education, and I've said that to my dad, and he's like, it's not free. You worked there for 26 years.
I think a good way to think about it is it's part of his benefits package.
Right. I mean, another good way to think about it is that it's part of his payment. He doesn't get paid a whole lot at a small Catholic university. It's like, but yeah, benefits package. But the education that I had was a privilege that he worked for and earned and gave to me as a gift. That what he really gave me, and I think you were speaking to this earlier, was the freedom to not be constrained by logistical concerns of like what I would study. And so in high school I studied psychology, and I had a psychology class in high school taught through the local community college, and I was just like, this is fucking amazing. This is so freaking cool. Meanwhile, also simultaneously like being in the like a real deep place of despair and depression myself, and seeing therapists that weren't helpful, to say shortly. And I remember thinking to myself, like, nobody should feel this shitty and sit with somebody and feel this much unhelp. Like it wasn't like it was just like talking to a barber. Like almost like an old barber who's just kind of like asking you questions, and you're like, talking, but anyway, like because I could go to university for free, like I didn't have to worry about like what am I gonna do. And so for a certain sense, I didn't like have my head on straight to think practically, but in the other sense, I was just like dreaming. But I think in my childhood, part of like my attaching to like becoming a priest was this pretty disconnected, not incarnational, like the necessary dualistic worldview that like, there's spirit and there's matter and there's this, world of good and evil that's disconnected from the material world. and I grabbed on this idea of being a priest, and I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. It's actually really quite beautiful. I think the past 3 years, I just said to her about how my spirituality has been deepening and becoming more real. I think probably for the past 24 years, my spirituality has been an act. Like, my spirituality has been doing the things that I think you do. Like, prayer for me has been doing the song and dance that you're supposed to do when you pray. Like, it's been, and I don't want to say like going through the motions, because I don't want to imply that there wasn't real energy there or real vitality. It wasn't like I was not alive in it, but as present and as intense as I could be, my spirituality was doing what I thought it meant to pray. And going to church as what I thought it meant to be spiritual. It was just this like facade in a certain sense. But I don't want to say facade, because I don't like the negative connotations of that. It was like I was doing the role. Like, I was playing the role, not for the role's sake, but because I actually cared about spirituality. But it was just disconnected. It wasn't incarnational. And I think in the last 3 years, for the first time, I'm not trying to pray the way that I think I should pray, and I'm not trying to be at Mass the way I think I should be at Mass. And someone like Richard Rohr has been, really helpful in what I've been reading recently. Mindfulness has had a huge impact on this, an enormous impact. But for the longest time, I think I've been trying to figure out like how to pray or how to have a relationship with God. And I was talking to my wife of like, I don't know if somebody else said this to me and I think it's my own quote or whatever, and so somebody could tag me or text me, but I think life is, and specifically spirituality, but life isn't about finding the right answers. It's about asking the right questions. And like the right questions for me in terms of spirituality these are the existential questions of like, who am I? What am I doing here? And my prayer is mostly like, who am I and who are you? With God. And it's not very much conversation. It's kind of just like asking those questions, then just like sitting there, or it's just like saying like, hey, I don't trust you, or whatever it is. But I for so long I lived in the same kind of perspective of like, I'll be happy when I get these things in place in my life, and then like when I have the house and the car and the job and the family, and then I'll be able to like settle down. And then I'll be able to really live my life. Like this idea that the life that we really want to live is around the corner. Maybe it's getting to high school, and then maybe it's getting to college, and then it's the internship, and then it's graduating, and whatever it is, As I've let go of that, as I've learned to let go of that idea more broadly in my life, I've also learned to let go of it more broadly specifically in my spirituality, and just realize that I don't know, I guess spirituality and prayer for me is more about experiencing this question of like, I don't know what the hell any of this is or what any of this means, but I'm just going to kind of sit here and sit in that unknowing and believe that there's a good God who's with me in it. And sometimes that's not very edifying. Sometimes it really sucks, and I'm just like, I fucking hate this. God, why? God, I hate this. I'm so resistant. Sometimes it's beautifully edifying, but I feel like for the first time in my life in these last few years, I'm letting go of trying to be who I think I should be. And that's a language that's really common that I've experienced, whether it's this small Catholic culture that we're in or like a more broader, like be the best person you can be, or be who God wants you to be. Like this idea that there's somebody else that I'm not being that I need to ascribe to. And I think for the first time in my life in the last few years, I'm just like, no, I think spirituality is about learning who am I, and can I be that like with God and with goodness, and can I believe that this world is good? can I actually believe that I'm good at my core? Because there's a lot of parts of me that are like, oh, you're not, you're a piece of shit. Because of that, you gotta figure everything out. You gotta be hyper intellectual. You gotta be uber successful so you can prove to yourself that you have the security. So, just as we were talking and hearing your own story too, it's bringing up stuff for me of like how there's been, and I think we were talking about this at the beginning of the podcast, right? Just kind of like, you got to go through the motions and you're anxious and you're performing, but there's a certain like settling in when we realize like we don't have to play the role or, and I guess I keep talking in circles about it because I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I feel like something's happening here for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My experience of Catholic practice has been to get me in the right territory, and honestly, like a lot of the rules that I've often reluctantly followed as a kid and a young adult have really protected me, I think, from getting involved in distractions that would make it a lot harder to hear the voice of God.
Woof, dude. Yeah.
But the big thing that has been was a really big shift in my spiritual life was, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but the voice of God always seemed to be so critical and demanding, because a lot of the saints that I would read sort of had this very like critical, demanding, like you should be this person.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they were pushing and squeezing to get the fruit of true spirituality, which is transformation, to squeeze it out through the will.
Yes.
Rather than it be a byproduct of safety in your relationship with God, to not hide things from Him, to be able to share every part of yourself with Him without being afraid that it's going to be rejected or cast away. And maybe it's not something that really is the truest representation of you, but at least, be able to share that with God in relationship. For me, it's been this coming to experience that a lot of what I thought was the voice of God, I guess I would now call my superego.
Yeah, or an introject or a part,
a manager, a critic, a harsh voice. Yes, and so, dude. But the problem with that is that I would not speak my mind to that harsh critic for fear that was God.
Right.
And so it was always a reluctant, like, okay, I'll do that. And then when I would leave prayer, I'd be like, God, I don't want to do what God wants me to do.
Yes.
And the paradigm shift to have the courage to say, okay, I'm actually just going to let my emotion towards God dictate the prayer. I really don't want to do this thing. Why are you making me do this? And I've often, this is sort of a broad thing I'm talking about, but the experience was that I don't want you to do that thing. That's not me.
Yeah.
That's you. And it's hard to do that because sometimes the critical voice is so deeply connected with the culture that you're involved in. Sometimes it's very deeply connected to your family conditioning that you've been brought up with. And also, sometimes it's helpful to listen to the critical voice to some degree, right? Like, I think a lot of my own character strengths have come from listening to a voice that has a very high standard.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't even just mean that as like, I hope that I'm not very interested in moral superiority in any way. But I mean helpful virtue in the sense of when stuff's gotten hard in my life, I've been able to really rely off of like an ability to kind of put my nose to the grindstone.
Yeah.
And that I say that's been helpful simply because it's just been helpful to get through hard things.
It's adaptive.
It's adaptive.
It's remarkable. Like the inner critic is remarkably adaptive, and that's why you have it. Like, you're going to be a piece of shit if you don't do this. Well, then I did it, and I'm actually like more stable because of it. It's remarkably adaptive. It has drawbacks. Well,
the problem that I think recently come to terms with is that it's almost totally toxic if it in any way determines your level of like closeness with God.
Yes.
Like how well I'm hitting the mark. If it's like, oh, I'm really killing it, I feel God's love and presence, versus like, oh, I'm not doing so well, He doesn't approve of me. I have to keep that. For me, that's a compulsion of some sort.
Yeah.
And I have to keep checking that with, no, that's just me thinking that I'm worthy, and I feel good about myself. Yeah. But what does the voice of a totally loving Father think of me? And in fact, what's the weird experience is that often I feel that there's a deeper experience of prayer when I'm doing horribly, like objectively, when I'm just sort of missing the mark, because then I'm able to experience that sense of maybe his mercy, maybe his acceptance. So I really resonate with you mentioned that about, feeling like you were supposed to be a priest. For me, the whole priesthood thing very often had to do with this like self-imposed standard that, I felt like I would have to live up to. And
right,
very often
that the priest is the highest calling.
And not that there isn't a high standard that is given to us through our relationship with Christ, but my feeling is that healthy religion gets you there. Like the difference between coping is that you're doing it with your will and you're white knuckling your way to doing it, and the difference between a transformation from a personal relationship with God is that you suddenly are disinterested more and more in the things that are quote sin. Right. I say quote sin because also I would say my perspective on sin is changing a lot. Often, like I think the most sinful state that I'm in is often when I'm in my head making judgments about people and watching, like my brain will do these things that'll say like I have the most nuanced approach to this thing. And for me, I'm starting to realize like that is the most sinful state I can be in. It's not really an action. It's more of like I catch myself in that place when I'm stressed. But when I'm finally taking care of myself, there's a sort of natural warmth that comes out of me. There's a natural altruism that comes out of me. But all of this is very different from my upbringing. Right. I mean, that's good too, to some degree. Like you have to. This has been a process for me of making it my own, in ways that are truly scary to make it my own. Yeah. Because it's like the ideas, I think, for me at least, I grew up thinking that were dangerous.
Yes.
Like it's dangerous to have an unconditionally loving God.
Yeah, because then you might do anything.
What will I do?
Right.
And what will I do if I really have full freedom?
Yeah. Like you have to have rigid boundaries. Otherwise, right, the kids will be overcome by their temptations, and that's not actually how it plays out. Maybe there's a chance of that, but like this is the garden. Like if God made us free, like if that is what we believe, and that's the first story of Catholic religion, Christianity, being in the garden, he really let us be free. Because he really said it's better that you be free and you make a mistake with that freedom than you do exactly what I say and you don't be free. And so like there is, when we're motivated out of fear, we don't allow space for freedom.
And that is sort of at the core of our tradition, in my opinion at least. When we were at the Easter Vigil, they read out that beautiful, I forget what passage it is, but "Oh, happy fault."
Oh, dude, that line, I never know it. I always swing back and forth with that line. Yeah, like, "Oh, happy fault." Yeah.
I guess the way I experience that is that if we don't leave the garden, if we don't leave our innocence, or I think of innocence more and more, less of like purity as unwoundedness, like our original innocence as our original unwoundedness. If we never become wounded, we never have a need to depend on God, which is the real experience of to be a child. But at the same time, like I more and more the image of the garden to me seems like we need to leave the garden. And at the same time, there's a part of us that's still in the garden.
Right.
I don't know if you ever have this experience, but there's times where I'm just working through my own stuff, and I do feel totally wounded. And then there's moments where I have this feeling like, what was I upset about?
Yes.
And there's this real feeling of like, now that I've been expressing it, the depth of the situation is that I'm truly okay. Not just okay, I'm at peace underneath all of this. And I don't feel that if I don't express my feelings. Yes. As soon as I start expressing it as they're getting moved through, I start to notice this sort of like, call it your inner child, or I like to think of it as like your true self in Christ. There's a part of me that I experience that sort of ebbs and flows that is in the garden still, that has its original unwoundedness. I think we've been like wrestling with what is the self a lot, and it's hard because it's not a static thing you can really observe. It's something you can sort of witness in action, maybe.
Well, you can't observe it because it doesn't exist as an identity. As soon as we name the self and make the self an identity, then something else is observing it, and it ceases to be that which it is, right? This is the phenomenological method, if I understand it correctly, which is that like something's obstructed as soon as we put a name to it. Like there's a certain amount of when we we won't go down that route. I don't
Can
know.
You keep going? Because I have to pee so bad. Can we take a quick break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
Okay.
Let's take a break.
I have to pee. I've had to pee for the last 45 minutes.
I'm actually really hoping that it's recording. Are we recording?
You were telling me about the we're back from our pee break.
Back from the pee break, folks.
You were telling me about as soon as you have a self to observe, it's not the self. You are the self observing some construct of the self.
Well, yes.
Perchance.
This is something that I've just been like exploring, playing around with, trying to figure out. But like there's this John the Baptist, I believe, says, "He must increase, I must decrease." And John Paul II says, the only time that we are fully ourselves is when we make a full gift of self to the other. And the 3 ages of the interior world, as described by the Catholic mystics,
Gary Gou-Lagrange, to my understanding, develop ultimately into, first we're purging ourselves of all our problematic attachments, and then we're becoming enlightened to like God and knowing him more, and then we become united to him. And right, so I think John, if I'm remembering correctly, says, "It is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me." Paul. Definitely Paul. John Paul. And the Buddhists have this perspective that there is no self, right? They call it no self or emptiness. And the goal of meditation is to recognize all these false egos that we create because either we want something or we are averse to something, or because having some story about who we are, giving ourselves an identity, creates a sense of coherence in the world and protects us from the fear that maybe we don't have this. Well, it gives us a sense of stability, from what I understand. And so all these ideas in my experience, in my prayer, in my development, and in the psychotherapy I do, like converge on this point. And something that I've been thinking about recently that's been interesting is like the bull, the golden bull in the Exodus story. And the people are under tyranny in Egypt. They're in slavery, and they leave that and go into the desert. Right? So there's like this moment of awakening of like, we don't deserve this, right? Moses experiences this moment of awakening, seeing a burning bush. Could it have been a DMT trip because the burning bush is acacia wood and that's where they get DMT? Could be. Shout out to the folk trio Acacia Wood.
Yeah, shout out. Shout out to the wood of acacia that gives you some trips. But, and here's the thing, right? Moses asks, like, who are you? And Christ says, Yahweh, I am who am. I'm pure being, right? So he actually doesn't give Yahweh, he doesn't really give an identity. He gives an experience, right? Like, I am. And as soon as and so there's this idea of like the golden bull that the Hebrews worship. When Moses goes off to talk to God, comes down and they're worshiping a golden bull. And like, I'm not super familiar on the mythology or the types or the imagery, but if you think about a bull, I'm pretty sure it has to do with like vitality, independence, like strength, domination, sensuality, like this independence, really, this strength and independence, and it's made out of gold, right? Like the
greatest of the material,
the
most flashy of the earthly,
the most desired of the things that exist on the earth, right? And so in the absence, like, what do we do when we don't know what to do? We create something to worship. And so like, I kind of see like the golden bull in a very material way is that like the false identities that I create for myself, these false ideas of who I am. Oh, I'm independent, or I have this idea of myself, John Paul's whatever, intelligent, independent, caring, thoughtful, and like all these things are true. But and totally subconsciously, I've created an idea of who I am to give myself security so I can attach to myself. And I think like kind of what we do is that same sense is like we worship idols, we create false selves, and then we worship them by doing what those false selves would do, right? Trying to be popular, trying to be liked, trying to make a lot of like money. And so I think, right, nature abhors a vacuum. And so, but like the moments of most fullness that I've experienced in my life, and I think many could say the same, are not mediated by thought. Like when we were in the Himalayas, right? I remember just like glancing out and like it was breathtaking. That's the description, breathtaking. Like I'm just like, oh my gosh, right? There's a Haitian proverb that beyond mountains there are mountains. And like we could say that from up top of just like the biggest mountains I could possibly have imagined, just stacked on top of each other for like miles all around. You know, when my wife was walking down the aisle and I was just like, there were no words. Right? Like, and then to go to the other end, like the first bite of smash burgers that we made last week. I opened up the griddle, like pulled it out, and I had smash. I was like, oh my, like before I'm even thinking this is so good, I bite and I just like, right? In that moment when I'm going like, I don't have an idea of myself. I'm fully immersed in the experience. Like in that moment when like my wife was walking down the aisle, and there's some back and forth there too, because all of a sudden there are parts of me that are like, holy shit, this is real, you know? But I was able to kind of be like, okay, that's fine. Like, yeah, guys, this is scary. It's okay. But to just be like, I'm just here. And like, I disappear, but what emerges is this connection. And I think if the more in that moment of my wife walking down the aisle, I would have been like, I'm marrying her. Actually, I would have experienced like a disconnection from that moment. The more like the sunset is setting and I'm trying to like provide these descriptions, like there's a way that like trying to describe the sunset actually takes me away from being like wow. And so all the wisdom that not all of it, I'm sure there's contradictory wisdom, but much of the wisdom that I've been like immersed in recently has kind of been teaching me like, let go of your idea of how you think things should be and be with what is. And when I am simply with what is, I don't have to have a concept of myself. And if I don't have a concept of myself, I don't have to find I don't have to like think about I'm gonna do, like you were kind of saying, there's this difference in prayer between like, am I responding to the self-critic of this idea of what I should be doing, or am I using the stick or the carrot, or am I just saying like, oh, I just want to do this? Like that's what I think comes out when you remove like the kind of self-flagellating, overly critical, overly rigid, demanding perspective. You realize that like, oh, we work much better with like a carrot than a stick, and actually like I don't need, like I think this is what we learned like athletically, like we were all about like, you gotta want it until you gotta want to be successful as bad as you want to breathe. Like that was my self-critic that pushed me through like a lot of adversity. But I realized like that critic can't help me to be, there's limitations, can't help me to be a great husband. That can only take me so far. Can't help me to be a great friend. Can't help me to be a great father. It can only take me so far. I need something else. And so I realized, well, what do I want to be? I want to be connected. Like the desire for connection is actually what helps me to be a great friend. The desire for connection is actually what helps me to be a great father and a great husband, hopefully a great one of all those. You can check with my wife to see where I am on the, if I'm there yet. I'm sure she'll, have some things to say. But there's just a certain disappearing of self that seems to emerge across contexts, both in the like very like everyday but beautiful experiences that I have in my life, and also across these like wisdom texts. And it seems like it's the exact opposite thing of like creating the bull, of like giving myself something to identify with. And so I guess it's just an idea and an experience that I'm just kind of like still like wrestling with and trying to figure out, and it just like kind of feels like something's happening, but I'm not quite sure what.
There's such a dance there.
Yeah.
I think that my I don't know, but I like to think of it as there's the big self and there's the small self.
Yeah.
I think Merton kind of describes it as true self, false self.
Mm-hmm.
Just like big self, small self, because even Merton would say this, that
right.
You need the false self or you need the small self. To function in society, right? Like you need some kind of identity that people know you by, so there's some predictability to you. Heard it said somewhere that the West is obsessed with personality and the East is obsessed with essence. And the East has the feeling that the West knows nothing about being because they're so caught up in personality. But they often Hindu spirituality has a increasing interest in these models like the Enneagram because you need to know about them too. Right? The alternative, I think, of no personality is you also lose a certain vibrancy. Like imagine a family where everybody was just Zen, all the kids, like there's no messiness to it all. There's a certain color that comes with everybody living inside of what makes them different. I like to think of it that where I get into trouble is where that becomes such a fixed model of action that my range of responses and actions are limited to a construct.
Right.
But there are certain centers of gravity that I have that I'm better at than others, and other people have gifts that they're more intuitive at than others. Right? I think of like an engineer. They're just really, really good at that kind of analytical thinking. I think I'm more in the realm of like holistic thinking rather than thinking with a sort of like laser focus, sort of a more mystical, let's bring pieces together, synthesis kind of thinking. Those are good things to develop because it's sort of like the body of Christ. We're not meant to be the whole body. Yeah. We're meant to contribute to the body. Some are the foot, some are the mouth, some are the heart, some are the brain. So I think there's a certain reverence for what makes us different that is so beautiful. And I think that's the beautiful thing of positive psychology. I think that's what, wrapping this up to everything we talked about at the beginning, knowing the language that people speak gives you the key to them. Is we also want to be seen for this self that maybe isn't who we really are. It's sort of a certain need. I mean, at least for me, like with my girlfriend, when I can just go off and rattle off factoids to her, as she calls it factoid Mikey. Yeah. I love it. I feel so at ease when she takes a genuine interest in the things that I'm learning and I can kind of explain them to her. If she gives me that attention, it fills me. Yeah. Now, do I need it in my soul of souls in Christ? I mean, there's a case you could make that maybe yes, maybe no. But I think it's, I have the similar experience at moments, rare moments, where I come to the edge of myself, where I come to the edge of my abilities or my limitations or my awareness, where I'm forced to sort of let go of that. And the experience is, it's not that I'm annihilated, but my sense of self doesn't frame the moment anymore.
That's a great
My sense of self isn't the context. It's sort of a more boundaryless experience. And then in that experience, it's very easy to love people. I'm not choosing to love people. I find that compassion, these natural qualities flow through me. But getting out of your own way is a challenge. But it's so funny because there's a flip side to this too, which Alan Watts was the Zen philosopher. Ram Dass was a guy at Harvard, previously Richard Alpert, who went to India and met his guru. Basically came back, was named Ram Dass, long beard, became a spiritual teacher instead of a Harvard professor. And Alan Watts one time sat him down and was like, you know what your problem is? You're addicted to formlessness.
Yes.
You're addicted to emptiness. Or I'm in this Facebook group called Meditation Humor that somehow my algorithm just feeds at the top. It's like I don't get who's married or who had a child, but I get meditation humor at the top of my algorithm. And it was the recent meme was like, let us empty our mind using Zen so that we can fill our mind with the Zen literature.
Yeah.
Every extreme just has a temptation to it.
Yeah.
And I found myself, when I was first getting into waking up, I was getting obsessed with using what appeared to be leaving the mental model behind. That became my new mental model.
Yes.
So there's all these weird dangers and traps, I think, in this spiritual life. But
because that's just another bowl.
It's just another thing to worship, is the formlessness or the boundlessness of experience.
It's just another idol. Yeah.
So I don't really have the answer, but I really resonate with this. And I also really resonate with the fact that people are different and we have personalities, and it certainly helps as a therapist to be able to really see that in somebody and to acknowledge it and to work with it.
Yes.
And to have a real working familiarity with the varieties of human personality as it expresses itself. Nobody's going to fit perfectly in the mold, but to have a general sense of it, I find it such a helpful tool. But then at the same time, every now and then as a therapist, I'll just give in. If they don't know what to do, or if I have a sense that this is a good thing to do, we'll do some kind of meditation where there's a real sort of nudging in the direction of having an experience of formlessness. And I like to think of it as we're building the size of the container. We're building a more inner spaciousness in which we can feel more inner safety with big taboo emotions. I sort of think of it as our dance is, can we build safety, and then can we head into the danger, bringing the safety with us.
Yeah. And that's safe haven, right? Having a place to contain the fear, and it's secure base, right? Having a place to contain fear, that's also a place to go out from. It's right. Peterson loves this idea of the constant explorer, right? The image of this guy it's like a galactic, not a galactic, but it's an archetypal image of this guy who's got one foot planted in the garden, right? In order, right? And one foot in the stars, exploring chaos.
I love it.
Yeah, man, I think this is also, I think, one of the things that I find so edifying about these conversations for me is that when I'm at my best, I'm not trying to think about what should I say or how should I say it. It's dude, I'm either just listening or I'm speaking, and the ability to shift back and forth in that is oh my gosh, I'm actually not trying to be this thing. You said it last time. Unfortunately, I don't think it got clipped because we had 8 different recording errors, but you said something along the lines of, you said something like allowing people to happen. Is that what you said?
I think so. That rings a bell.
You said something along the lines of the line you said, which, dude, you've got a lot of good one-liners that just happened. Like, earlier you said, the key of being that unlocks people, to be in the place of comfort and safety and expansiveness, or something along those lines. I thought it was beautiful. But you said something along the lines of, what's beautiful for you about conversations and dialogues is that you can allow people to happen. And I think that's my hope for this, is that you and I here are allowing each other to happen. And we are, like, here we're trying to create the big container that has space for it all.
Ironically, like, as someone who's probably tended towards, like, let me just put 2 feet in chaos.
Yeah.
The really transformative experience for me has been the feeling of how grounding 1 foot in order can be. And I think the biggest experience of that has been the frame of psychotherapy. Like, the temptation is like, oh, this is a really good session, let's go over.
Yes.
But maintaining that boundary allows it to have this sense of predictability that creates greater and greater security.
Right.
And the client knows, like, this is just going to happen every week. He's dependable. He's also going to end on time. Yeah. It gives a sense of predictability that allows more and more to emerge. Yeah. It's like, if you can have, or mindfulness, you have this sense of the witness being the watcher of all things passing across the screen of consciousness. That's an incredibly grounding experience to grow in. Mm-hmm. And so the more and more instability arises, the more you also have a growing sense of, but I'm still here witnessing it. It's the same experience. Mm-hmm. It's just new stuff.
Yes.
That's the ultimate security, maybe. But looks like we're almost out of time.
We are, man. Like, as you were saying, the frame creates safety, so we'll stick to our frame here. So, dude, it's so good. This has been a fucking blast. This has been so fun.
I guess we'll have to fly me in every time.
Yeah.
We get enough subscribers, we'll have a budget.
Join us on Patreon and give us $500,000 so we can fly Mikey out here every day and fly him home to his
There's spit everywhere.
Louisiana and Bayou. But, dude, something I was really struck by in the first one that we did, listening to it at the end, that you were like, before we wrapped up, you were like, I love you, man. And that just stuck with me. It was like, dude, I love that I can be loved here and loved by you, and I love this, and it's a beautiful thing that this is something that's really fun that comes out of that love of friendship, and love you.
Love you too.
Here's till next time.
Amen.
Coming at you live, as we like to say, even though we're never live.
From the Dirty Tap.
From the Dirty Tap Water. Thanks for listening.
Stay tuned.